The bistro au luxe always felt a bit like a stage. The soft lighting, the quiet hum of polite conversation, the gentle clink of expensive silverware. It was a place where people came to be seen, to discuss important things in low voices, and to feel a certain distance from the ordinary world outside. He was one of the main actors on this stage, a regular. You could tell by the way the hostess greeted him, not with a forced smile, but with a slight, knowing nod. He was a man who wore his money, not with flashy jewelry, but with a deep, unshakable confidence. His suits were quiet and perfectly fitted. His watch was simple, but told you everything about the time he could afford. Tonight, he was with two other men, both leaning in as he spoke. He was explaining something, his hands moving slowly in the air to draw an invisible graph of success. This was a business dinner, and he was in charge. Moving quietly around the edges of this scene was the waitress. She was young, maybe in her mid-20s, with a calm, observant face. Her name tag said Elena, but to the regulars, she was mostly just a pleasant presence. She was good at her job, very good. She remembered who wanted their steak with no peppercorn sauce, who needed a fresh glass of water before they even asked, and how to clear plates without ever interrupting a sentence. She moved like a shadow, efficient and silent, making sure the play on the stage ran smoothly. Her eyes, however, sometimes told a different story. They would sometimes drift, just for a second, towards the far corner of the restaurant. There, gathering a little dust in the soft light, stood a beautiful baby grand piano. It was a piece of art, a symbol of a fancy restaurant. But no one ever played it. The music here came from hidden speakers, playing safe, classical tunes that no one really listened to. The man at the prime table finished his point and took a slow sip of his wine. His eyes scanned the room, as if looking for his next point of interest. They passed over the other diners, over the paintings on the wall, and landed on the piano. Then they slid to the waitress, who was carefully placing a dessert fork next to a slice of chocolate cake. Abdu? Small idea seemed to click into place behind his eyes. It wasn't a kind idea. It was the sort of idea that comes from feeling powerful and a little bored, from wanting to add an unexpected twist to the evening's entertainment. He watched her for another moment, a faint smile touching his lips. He put his wine glass down with a soft, deliberate tap. When she passed by his table to collect an empty bread basket, he raised a hand slightly. "Excuse me, young lady." She stopped immediately, turning to him with a professional, neutral expression. "Yes, sir? Can I get you anything else?" He didn't answer about the food or drink. Instead, he gestured broadly towards the silent piano. "That instrument," he said, his voice now a little louder, wanting his guests to hear. "It looks lonely, don't you think? It's just for decoration? What a waste." She followed his gesture, then looked back at him, waiting. "You," he said, his tone now playful, but with an edge underneath. "You have clever hands. I see how you manage all those plates. Surely someone like you has learned a little piano? Every nice girl learns a little piano, right?" One of his companions chuckled softly. The waitress, Elena, kept her face still. "It's not for staff use, sir. It's decorative." "Oh, rules," he said, waving a hand as if brushing away a fly. "We can make an exception for a bit of culture. How about it? Play us something simple. Give us a little live music. It would be so much nicer than this recorded stuff." His smile was wide now, but it didn't reach his eyes. This was a game. He was putting her on the spot, creating a little drama for his dinner guests. The expectation was clear. She would fluster, she would make a polite excuse, and he would sigh and say something like, "Well, I tried," making her seem simple and himself worldly for attempting to bring some art to the help. The section of the restaurant around them had grown quieter. Other diners were pretending not to listen, but they were listening. The other waitstaff had paused, watching from near the kitchen door. The air felt tight. Elena stood very straight. "I'm in the middle of my shift, sir. Perhaps another time." Her voice was even polite, but firm. This resistance seemed to fuel the man. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He slid out a single $100 bill and placed it on the white tablecloth. It looked very green and very crisp. "For your trouble," he said. The meaning was heavy in the air. This was no longer a request for music. It was a transaction. He was paying to see her try and fail, paying to turn her into the evening's entertainment. The silence was complete now. Everyone waited to see what the quiet waitress would do. Not the silence in that corner of the restaurant was heavy and hot. It pressed down on everyone. You could hear the soft jazz still playing from the speakers, a sound that now felt fake and far away. All eyes were fixed on the young waitress and the man with the money on his table. The waitress, Elena, looked at the $100 bill. It wasn't a look of desire or even anger. It was more like she was studying a strange insect that had landed on his perfectly white tablecloth. For a few seconds that felt much longer, she said nothing. Her face, usually so focused on her work, was unreadable. She was weighing something much bigger than the money. The man leaned back in his chair, enjoying the scene he had created. He had set his little trap, and now she was caught in it. If she refused now, she would look rude and ungrateful after he had offered what he saw as a small fortune for a simple task. If she tried and played badly, as he fully expected, she would be the joke. It was a win for him either way. He exchanged a small, knowing glance with one of his dinner guests, a man who was trying hard to look amused, but just looked uncomfortable. Finally, Elena moved. But she didn't reach for the money. She didn't look at the man again. Instead, she turned her head slowly toward the small service station against the wall. Standing there was the restaurant manager, a man in his 50s named Paul, who had seen all kinds of difficult customers in his time. His face was tight with worry. This was exactly the kind of situation he hated: a regular customer, causing trouble with a good employee. Elena walked towards Paul, her shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. Every person at the nearby tables watched her go, their heads turning slowly as if watching a tennis match. She stopped in front of Paul and spoke in a voice so low only he could hear it. But her body language was clear. It wasn't a plea. It was a quiet, firm statement. "Paul," she said, "my 10-minute break. I'm taking it right now." Paul looked from her calm eyes to the smug man at the table and back again. He knew this girl. She had worked for him for over a year. She was never late, never complained, and had a strange, serious maturity about her. He also knew the customer was powerful and spent a lot of money here. But in that moment, he saw something in Elena's expression he hadn't seen before. A kind of deep, quiet fire. He gave one short, sharp nod. "Okay," he whispered back. 10 minutes. That was all she needed. She turned away from the manager, and now, for the first time, she started walking towards the piano. A soft murmur rippled through the restaurant. People were whispering behind their hands. Some felt sorry for her, forced into this embarrassing test. Others were just curious to see what would happen. Would she really go through with it? The man at the table watched her walk, a smile of pure satisfaction on his face. He had won. She was obeying. He picked up his wine glass again, ready to enjoy the show. He imagined a clumsy child's tune, maybe a few wrong notes, and then he would give her a slow, patronizing clap. He might even let her keep the $100 as a lesson in humility. Elena reached the piano. It was a beautiful, sleek black instrument, its lid propped open like a dark wing. She placed her fingertips lightly on its closed keyboard cover for a moment. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She wasn't looking at the man. She was looking at the piano as if she was seeing an old friend, or a complicated machine she knew how to operate. Then she did something that seemed a little odd. She reached down and carefully, deliberately, untied the black apron from around her waist. She folded it once, neatly, and placed it on top of the piano bench. It was a small action, but it meant something. She was stepping out of her role. She was no longer the waitress. For these next few minutes, she would be something else. She sat down on the bench, her back straight. She adjusted the bench's position slightly, a move that looked professional, like a driver adjusting a car seat before a race. She opened the keyboard cover, revealing the row of white and black keys. She then placed her hands in her lap for a second, took a slow, deep breath, and closed her eyes. The room was utterly, completely silent. The recorded music had even been turned off. Someone at the back had thought to do that. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the bar. The man at the table felt the first tiny flicker of doubt. This wasn't the behavior of someone who was about to play a shaky version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This was the ritual of a performer, a serious one. She opened her eyes, lifted her hands, and let them hover just above the keys. Her fingers were long and slender, but there was a strength in them you could see. They were the hands of someone who worked, but also of someone who had done this particular work for a very, very long time. And then she began. Her hands didn't come down with a timid little tap. They didn't search for a simple melody. They fell upon the keys with a purpose, with a physical weight that seemed to surprise the piano itself. The sound that came out wasn't a single note, but a deep, rolling, complex chord. It was a sound that seemed to start in the lowest part of the piano and rise up through the floor, vibrating in the water glasses on the tables. It was a serious, grown-up, and profoundly sad sound. The man at the table, who had just taken a sip of wine, stopped with the glass halfway to his mouth. His eyebrow twitched. This was not what he had ordered. Then her left hand began a steady, powerful rhythm, a deep heartbeat of low notes that walked forward with a kind of grim determination. A moment later, her right hand joined in, and what it played was a melody that seemed to pour straight from a wounded heart. It was longing, it was memory. It was a huge wave of feeling, held back by incredible control. The notes soared, climbing higher and higher, twisting and turning in beautiful, complicated patterns. This was not background music. This was a story being told, a storm being painted in sound, right there in the quiet restaurant. Every single person in the place froze. A busboy carrying a heavy tray of dirty dishes stopped so suddenly that the plates clattered softly, but he didn't even notice. The manager, Paul, who was standing by the kitchen door, felt his jaw go slack. He knew she was a quiet, private girl, but this was like discovering a nuclear reactor in the storage closet. The other diners were transfixed. An older couple, celebrating an anniversary, held hands tightly, tears welling in their eyes for reasons they couldn't explain. A group of friends who had been laughing loudly just minutes before were now sitting perfectly still, their smiles gone, replaced by looks of awe. The waitress, Elena, was gone. The person on the bench was someone else entirely. Her body moved with the music. She leaned into the powerful parts, her shoulders strong. Her face, which had been a mask of polite calm, was now alive with expression, concentration, sorrow, a flicker of defiance. When the music became soft and tender, her whole being seemed to soften, her fingers touching the keys with a feather-light grace. When it built again, crashing like waves against rocks, she was a force of nature, her arms and hands moving with a power and speed that seemed impossible. It was a physical performance. You could see the effort, the years of practice in every movement. The man who had demanded this performance felt the color drain from his face. The smug, satisfied feeling was gone, replaced by a cold, sinking sensation in his stomach. He wasn't hearing a simple tune. He was hearing a masterpiece. He was hearing a language of emotion and skill, so far beyond his own understanding that it made him feel small. He looked at his dinner guests. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were completely lost in the music, their faces showing pure wonder. He was irrelevant. The $100 bill on the table in front of him now looked like what it was: a cheap, pathetic trick. It was a piece of paper in a world of gold. He tried to take another sip of wine, but his hand wasn't steady. He put the glass down, the clink too loud in the ocean of sound. He wanted it to stop. He wanted to rewind the last 5 minutes and never open his mouth. But he was powerless. He was just another member of the audience, forced to witness the incredible thing he had stupidly set in motion. The music filled every corner of the room. It poured out of the piano and wrapped around the people. It wasn't just something you heard. It was something you felt in your chest. For those few minutes, the fancy restaurant disappeared. The expensive clothes, the business deals, the social games, none of it mattered. The only thing that was real was the story being told by those flying hands. And through it all, she never once looked at the crowd. She never glanced at the man who had tried to embarrass her. Her world had shrunk to the black and white keys, to the journey of the song. She was somewhere else entirely, in a place of memory and muscle, of technique and raw feeling. The apron, folded neatly beside her, was 1,000,000 miles away. This was who she was, when no one was ordering dessert or complaining about the soup. This was her true work, the music built to a final thunderous peak. A series of chords crashed down like a great wave breaking, powerful and final. And then, with one last ringing, beautiful note that hung in the air, it was over. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It wasn't tense or waiting. It was a deep, full silence, like the air after a storm has passed. It was a silence of respect. No one moved. For a few long seconds, the spell was still too strong to break. Then, a single person from a table near the back started clapping. It was a slow, steady clap, almost a salute. That sound seemed to wake everyone else up. Suddenly, the entire restaurant erupted. The applause was not the polite patter given to a background singer. It was loud, warm, and real. People were pushing back their chairs to stand up. They were smiling, their eyes wide. The busboy with the tray was clapping so hard he nearly dropped it. The manager, Paul, was clapping too, shaking his head in disbelief, a huge, proud grin on his face. But the woman at the piano did not smile for the crowd. She did not take a bow. The moment the last note faded, she seemed to return to her own body, to the quiet room. She became still. She placed her hands gently back in her lap and just looked at the piano keys for a brief moment, as if saying a silent goodbye. Then she stood up. She reached for her folded apron. With the same calm, deliberate movements as before, she untied it and slipped it back over her head, knotting it securely around her waist. The transformation was immediate and complete. The artist was gone. The waitress had returned. She closed the keyboard cover with a soft thud, covering the keys. She did not look at the cheering, applauding room. Her face settled back into its familiar, professional calm. She simply turned and began to walk, not towards the man's table, not to take a bow, but straight back to the service station, where she had left her tray. The applause followed her. People were calling out, "Bravo!" and "Encore!" But she kept walking, her eyes forward. She wasn't being rude. It was as if that performance had happened in a different world, a world that was now closed. This was her workplace, and her break was over. She reached the service station, picked up her tray, the same tray she had put down just minutes before, and checked her notepad. She then turned and walked towards the kitchen doors, as if to check on an order. She moved through the crowd of her still-clapping colleagues, offering them the tiniest, quickest smile at private. Shared look before pushing through the swinging doors and disappearing dot. The applause in the dining room finally began to die down. People slowly sat back in their chairs, buzzing with excitement. They were talking to each other in thrilled whispers. "Did you see that? Who is she?" That was unbelievable. The energy in the room had completely changed. It was electric with wonder, but at one table there was no buzz, no wonder. There was only a heavy, cold quiet. The man sat perfectly still. The applause for her felt like a physical slap to him, over and over. His face was pale. He stared at the space where she had been, then down at the untouched $100 bill on the tablecloth. It looked stupid and insulting now. It was a joke, and he was the punchline. His dinner guests were awkward. They were thrilled by what they had witnessed, but they were sitting across from the man who had caused it in the worst possible way. They didn't know what to say. Incredible. One of them finally muttered, not looking at him. The other just nodded. Taking a long drink of water, the man finally moved. He reached out a hand, not for his wine, but for the bill. He picked it up slowly, folded it once, and put it back into his wallet. The gesture felt like an admission of a huge mistake. He had tried to buy a little moment of superiority, and instead he had paid for his own humiliation. He had wanted to show off his power, but she had shown a power he could never have a real, earned, breathtaking talent. He didn't feel rich or important anymore. He felt small. The memory of her music, that huge, emotional sound coming from someone he had seen as just part of the furniture, was shaking him. He had looked at her and seen only a job title. He had not seen a person. And she had shown him, and everyone else, exactly who that person was. He signaled for the check, his movements stiff. He needed to leave. The room, which had always felt like a place he owned, now felt like it belonged to her. The echoes of the piano seemed to still be in the air, a quiet judgment he could not escape. The manager, Paul, found her a little while later in the narrow alley behind the restaurant. It was her true break time now. She was sitting on an upturned crate, the city's distant hum her background music, sipping slowly from a glass of water. The sharp, proud performer was gone, replaced again by the tired but calm young woman he knew. He leaned against the brick wall beside her, not saying anything at first. He just let out a long, slow whistle, shaking his head. "Well," he finally said, his voice gentle, "I guess we know what you do on your days off." She looked up at him and gave a small, tired smile. It was the first real, relaxed expression she had shown all night. "Sorry if it caused a scene, Paul." "Caused a scene?" He laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Elena, you didn't cause a scene." He did. You ended it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I knew you were special. You have a focus most people don't. But that was from another planet. Why are you here? Carrying plates. Dealing with guys like him." She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just commanded the piano. They were strong hands, with a few small scars from the oven racks and the sharp edges of kitchen trays. "My mom is sick," she said simply, her voice quiet but clear. "The treatments are expensive. The insurance doesn't cover it all. My work during the day, it's my other job. It doesn't pay enough by itself." "Your other job?" Paul asked, though he was already starting to guess. "I teach piano at the community college in the mornings," she said. "And I practice. I have a big competition coming up in a few months. The prize money is significant. It could change everything." She took another sip of water. "This job here, the tips are good. The hours at night let me practice during the day. It's just for now. It's just to help." Paul nodded, understanding dawning on him. The pieces fit together, the exhaustion sometimes in her eyes, the way she valued every shift, her quiet patience. She wasn't just waiting for life to start. She was fighting for it, building it piece by difficult piece. "Would you like me to say something to him?" Paul asked, his voice hardening slightly. "He's still in there, settling his bill. He looks like he's seen a ghost." She shook her head firmly. "No, please don't. It's over. I played, that's all." She meant it. For her, the encounter wasn't about him at all. It was an unwelcome interruption, an obstacle she had to step over to get back to her real path. His opinion, his embarrassment, his money, none of it mattered to her world. Back inside, the man was indeed settling his bill. He paid with a credit card, his signature a hurried scratch. The usual proud banter with the server was absent. He just wanted to leave. As he stood to go, he paused, looking towards the kitchen doors. He seemed to want to say something, to do something, but the words wouldn't come. What could he possibly say? "Sorry I tried to humiliate you? You're actually a genius?" The absurdity of it choked him. He simply turned and walked out of the restaurant, the door closing with a soft sigh behind him. The story, of course, did not end that night. In a way, it was just beginning. The people in the restaurant told their friends. The friends told their friends. Someone had taken a shaky, awestruck video on their phone. It wasn't perfect, but you could hear the power, see the transformation. Without using her full name, out of a respect the regular had never shown. People shared the story online. A rich guy picks on a waitress. And you won't believe what happens next. The whispers reached the local newspaper. A curious reporter did some digging, always respecting the young woman's privacy about her family. They found out about her upcoming national competition, about her teaching, about her quiet dedication. They wrote a story not about a viral moment, but about an artist. The headline read, "The pianist who works the night shift." A few weeks later, a plain envelope arrived at the restaurant for her. Paul gave it to her. Inside was not $100 bill. There was no note, no name. Inside was a donation receipt from a well-known medical charity, made in her mother's honor for a very large amount of money. It was an apology that used no words, an attempt to make right what could never fully be fixed. She looked at it for a long time, her emotions unreadable. Then she put it away. She didn't speak of it. Her focus remained the same. Her mother, her practice, the competition. The man never came back to the bistro au luxe. Some said he had sold his business and moved to another city. Others said they saw him once at a charity concert for a music school for underprivileged children, sitting in the back, alone, listening very intently. And the young woman? She won the competition. The prize money helped, as she knew it would. She became known, not as the waitress pianist, but as a musician of stunning depth and feeling, one whose music spoke of resilience, of quiet strength, of a deep and knowing soul. Critics wrote about the powerful life in her performances. She still visited the restaurant sometimes, but as a guest. Paul would always seat her himself. And on very rare, quiet nights, if the mood was right and the staff asked her kindly, she would sometimes play that baby grand piano again. Not for applause, not for any man, but just for the joy of it. And every time she did, the whole room would fall into that same deep, respectful silence, remembering the night a person they thought they saw clearly showed them who she truly was.